What's going on, guys? Carmine here, and yes, I know, I'm incredibly late on this, and I've got some explaining to do as to why I've been absent for so long. I'll be doing a separate video on that in case you're curious, and of course, because I do Game of Thrones content, it's only fitting that it would involve someone trying to blackmail me. Yeah. But that aside, I do apologize for being gone for so long. It warms my heart to know that some of you have missed me and have actively expressed your concerns. Once again, I'll address that in a separate video. Now, Game of Thrones Season 6 has been a rather weird and less fulfilling season than its predecessors, and judging by that statement, this is going to be one of those videos where I need to set aside the fanboy feelings and look at it with neutrality and critique it like any other movie or show. My episode reviews were just my opinions based on each individual episode, and in this video we will focus on the entire season as a whole, and that is what I'm judging it on. With that out of the way, let's get on to it. First, let's start with what I disliked about this season. For one, the opening episode was absolutely awful in terms of story progression or impact. In previous seasons, the opening episode offered an insight into what's to be expected and generally hyped us up for what's to come, but this episode failed to deliver that altogether. There were a few tidbits that were cool, like Melisandre's magic wearing off, Theon and Sansa's escape, and that's about it. Each segment offered so little that it didn't really do much for me at all. I understand that with so many storylines, it was hard to show what everybody was up to since last season, and how they've progressed since then, but you'd have to look at another issue I'll get into in about a minute. My main problem with Season 6's Episode 1 is that it felt like deleted scenes from Season 5. While generally I enjoy when they do start off right from last season's final episode to keep us informed on what's going on, it only works best when there is enough of an opening to set the stage right, and they didn't do that. If Game of Thrones is good at one thing, then it's keeping us wanting more, but in a good way. And this just kept us wanting more in a that's it kind of way. Another major issue I had with this season is how short each episode was. Now granted, I would have never noticed this if my buddy down the street hadn't pirated the show. I watch it on HBO Go and it normally says each episode is around 56 minutes or more, but that isn't the case because when I went over at his house and he was watching it, it showed a much different time for the episode because when people put it up for download online, they never really include the ending credits or the behind the scenes footage. If you take out the opening intro, the ending credits, and the behind the scenes stuff, it's really less than 48 minutes of content, which is weird because in previous seasons, the episodes extended beyond 55 minutes. While I understand you guys enjoy those things, and I do too, I would rather have more content and then behind the scenes footage added on, instead of them trying to pass off like the season is longer than it actually is. So why is this important? Well, because the less time in each episode is given, it's less time we get with our characters and storylines, and it comes off being a bit hollow with almost nothing really to show. It really did feel like the writers ran out of book material and they had to fill in the gaps between the opening and closing episodes with as much crap as they could, and it really felt unfulfilling. One example of this is the King's Landing stuff. The opening and closing episodes were great and had so much tension, and I was generally excited about them. Jaime's confrontation with the High Sparrow in Episode 2 was good, and Cersei ultimately taking him out by wildfire in the finale was great, but then the in-between episodes where they all sit around discussing how much of a jerk he is, and the cocktail scenes from the trailer just left me feeling disappointed with how little came of them. I thought Jaime and the Tyrell soldiers storming in there would lead to some awesome action and cool twists, but nah. Cersei and the Mountain's confrontation with the Sparrows and her epic line, "I choose violence," was just a letdown because all he did was kill one guy. Granted, it was a nice kill, but both scenes felt like they were only written into the show to hype us up in the trailers. In short, they had no substance. And it's starting to feel as though the show doesn't know what to do with these characters without George guiding them. One example of this is how they completely ruined the tension in the Marine Siege by having Dany show up in the same episode, and that pretty much removed any momentum the attack had put on the audience in terms of suspense. Game of Thrones is known for its unpredictability, and the moment we're able to know what's about to happen just from a character showing up, then it loses its steam. It's bad writing. Another example of this is with the characters I was hoping to get back into this season, to see what's been going on with them. Well, they either died too quickly or were just boring. I wanted to see more of Rickon, more of Roose Bolton, Brendan Tully, also known as the Blackfish, and maybe even Doran Martell coming into his own, but they were all a big letdown. Ironically, the people I found annoying or boring in previous seasons were actually entertaining this time around. Bran's adventures in Season 3 and 4 weren't my cup of tea, but he had some of the best moments this season with his flashbacks. Hell, even Sam and Gilly, who I notoriously dislike, also had good moments between them as well. And I love how, right before they start getting interesting, I made an entire video on why I didn't like them and how they were wasted and given way too many scenes, and then boom, I enjoy the hell out of them this season. And in my defense, I think a lot of the points I made in that video, looking back on it now, were pretty good, as to why they kind of sucked, and then HBO fixes that completely in the new season. Which brings me to what I did like about this season, and like I said, certain characters did surprise me with what they brought to the table. Sam and Gilly had a rough start for me because I hate their whole, I love you, no, I love you, bullshit that they always go into, but that was cut down, and Sam actually did some interesting things. Heading over to his home of Hornhill was great, stealing the Valyrian sword was also cool, and I really enjoyed him over at the Citadel. James Faulkner, who plays Sam's dad, Randall Tarley, did a great job and certainly lives up to the reputation everybody has built for him in the past 5 seasons. Gilly, as usual, was meh, but Sam did a good job this time around keeping my attention that she didn't bore me too much. Another character I mentioned that I wasn't too keen on is Bran. In the past, his character has always been on this journey which seemed to take forever to get to, but the destination is definitely worth it. It's through Bran that we finally get to see the infamous Tower of Joy battle and even learn about Hodor's origins, which were a great, sad moment the show really needed and for the right reasons. Hell, we even get Uncle Benjen back with us, if only for a brief time. Another thing I really enjoyed about this season was the fight choreography during the Tower of Joy scene and even the Battle of Bastards. This season, everybody brought their A-game when it came to sword combat, and it shows. Another thing I really enjoy but don't speak much of is the set pieces for a lot of the scenes. River Run looked pretty awesome, and I always appreciate the attention to detail. So did Pike over on the Iron Islands, and even Sam's home of Hornhill. If there's one thing the show does right, it's making us believe we're actually at these fantasy locations, and I always appreciate that. Now, I can't end this review without giving major appreciation to some of our newcomers this season who really did a good job. Bella Ramsey, who plays the Little Lady of Bear Island, Lyanna Mormont, gained a cult following after the season was done, and for good reason. She was a great actress and enjoyable in her performance. Some of you were trying to petition the show to give her the 3 dragons, and I couldn't agree more. It took Dany 5 seasons to begin her conquest of Westeros, but it'd probably take Lyanna Mormont 5 seconds. Another character I really did enjoy is Ian McShane's brother Ray, who appeared for 1 episode but made an impact on me. It's rare to see such a peaceful person with no hidden motives in a world of corrupt politicians, blood, and magic, and like I said, it's quite refreshing, and I did enjoy the character for who he was. Something you guys probably found me saying often this season is, I wanted to see more of when it came to certain characters, and there's a good reason for it. Whether it's Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, or Game of Thrones, I always love listening to these old and experienced characters talk about the past and add to the lore of the universe. It really helps flesh out the story, and it's always something I look forward to. And now let's focus on some individual characters for a minute here, who are usually at the center of our story. Cersei this season was, for the most part, quite boring. The season finale aside, she was everybody's punching bag. Despite having a huge bodyguard that can literally rip the heads off people who mess with her, she didn't really do much this season but stand around and try to look as uncomfortable as possible. I get that her whole character is to try to be the female Tywin and fail at it, but it wasn't as enjoyable this time around. With all that wealth and influence, you would think she could hire some atheist assassins to kill the High Sparrow, but nah, that would be way too interesting. In fact, even her brothers this time around weren't doing much of anything compared to previous seasons. Jaime was on the sidelines for the most part, only getting good when he arrived at Riverrun, but even that was short-lived. And Tyrion, other than his interactions with Varys and the dragons, was quite useless. The only time the Lannister storyline started picking up was towards the end when Cersei goes all Bin Laden on the High Sparrow and Tyrion becomes Hand of the Queen. Dany, on the other hand, was great up until she reappeared and then she sucked. What I mean by that is, the first 4 episodes of her storyline was great, and then they kind of included her in there again to give that cringeworthy speech on top of Drogon's back, which was really unnecessary. I would have liked for her to have taken a break from episodes 5 to 9 and reappear on the dragon's back kicking ass. Like, do you guys remember a while back when I was wondering what made Dany so annoying to me? I think I know what it is now. Too much of her. Yeah, I think that's what it is. Do you guys have that one person in your life that is around way too much to the point where you know you like them, but you'd like them a lot more if they were not around as much? Dany is that person for me in this show. She's like wine. It's good to have in small doses, but then when you have too much of it, then it's a problem. As for the Starks, they were a bit of a mixed bag for me. Jon had a lot of things going on, and I can safely say we were all waiting for him in every episode. The audience was definitely focused on him this season, and for good reason. He was really entertaining. Even when he wasn't on the front lines or trying to suppress his boner in episode 2, Jon, for the most part, was the main character this season, and I would go as far as to say he even surpassed Dany for the title of MVP. Arya is another one whose scenes were good, for the most part. There were moments where I wasn't really feeling it, and I do think her storyline with the Faceless Men moved a little too fast towards its conclusion, but I did enjoy her this season, especially at the end. Sansa, on the other hand, is still kind of for me. I'm glad the writers stopped doing terrible things to her because it was getting a little old, and at this point I was starting to think someone had it out for the actress or something. I mean, she had to go through torture and rape and voting in this election. Oh god, it's just enough, you know? But even though she is mainly a sidelines character, her interactions with Jon and everybody else were pretty good, especially with Ramsay. Now, the other houses were okay for the most part. House Tyrell barely saw any action, even though they do have a great scene with the soldiers. Most of their big players were away for most of the season. House Aaron, despite having a big scene towards the end, was really sidelined, which is understandable. Out of all the houses, them and House Tully really don't need that much screen time. House Greyjoy, I need to save my thoughts on these guys for another video. And House Martell. Look, my doctor says I really shouldn't talk about them because, you know, blood pressure and all, so I'm just gonna skip that tragedy. But House Mormont is a minor house that really pulls through in this show. You have a Mormont who gives Jon his magical zombie killing sword. Then they declare some crucial fighting men to the cause, who ultimately sacrifice themselves to get a shield inside Winterfell that helps in defeating Ramsay. Then, their leader ultimately declares Jon Snow king in the north. I wouldn't be surprised if the chair Jon is sitting in right now was somehow made by Mormont. My god, man. If I was Jon, I would get a tattoo that says, "I heart Mormont," on my arm or something. They're that important to him. Now, I'm sure we can all agree that the best episodes this season had to have been episodes 2, 3, 5, 9, and 10. Arguably episode 4, but the general favorites are the ones I mentioned, and for good reason. Those episodes had the most going on and they did a good job of moving the story along. It's a far cry from season 1 in which every episode was good, and I see this as a sign of the show's mortality. The longer anything continues, the more we'll see a drop in quality. Season 6 isn't the best season, and it doesn't quite return the show to form, but it did what it could without more source material. Whether or not that is an issue with George not finishing his books on time or the writers not being able to make do is a topic for another time. But overall, Season 6 had its moments. Half of the time it was enjoyable and full of fun surprises, and the other half, well, it was alright. Game of Thrones is definitely starting to show a bit of wear and tear, and I don't know if that's the fault of the writers because they suck, or if it's due to lack of source material. Regardless, this season wasn't as good as previous ones, but it did give us some genuine moments that we'll always remember. While some moments were forgettable, others were not. If I had to give this season a rating, it would be a 4 out of 5, and that's me being generous. What we got was so good, it manages to hold that rating just perfectly, but unfortunately, so many characters, plot lines, and even deaths were just mishandled this season, and a lot of those bad episodes really hold this from being a perfect 5. Now, I know this review seems incredibly short, and that is mainly because I cut it down from its original 1 hour and 42 minutes. The Season 6 review doesn't stop here, so join me next time when I go into best and worst characters this season, and even best scenes. Thanks for the love and support, and I'll see you guys next time. Baba Booey.